Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Mariana. Good morning. I'm Reverend Brian. It's good to see everyone here. It's summer. It feels like summer. Well, I'm not going to get myself into trouble by talking about dogs and cats today. But I'm going to talk about my other favorite animal, which is birds. I love birds. If I could be any animal, I'd like to be a bird, because I think that idea of flying would just be awesome. Wouldn't it be so convenient not flying without going through security? Taking your shoes off. Why we do that, I still don't know. But one of the things I love to watch when I'm at the beach, I don't know if you go down to the beach, but watching flocks of birds fly and how they kind of turn in unison. And it almost seems instantaneous, they all turn. And you know what? We don't know how they do that. Is there one leader? Is there some way they communicate, but they all turn at one time? So you've got each individual bird, but then when they decide to turn, they almost turn as one unit. I'm really impressed. And this story I'm going to share for the Time for All Ages comes from India. And it's about this hunter. And he basically hunts birds. And he's a good hunter. He knows how to hunt birds. He puts feed down, and when all the birds come down and land, he throws a net over them and scoops them all up and keeps the birds. But then one of the birds is quite smart. He thought, when he does that, if we were all to fly at the same time in the same direction, we could just lift the net up and then eventually fly under it. And so he suggests to the other birds, let's do that. Let's all fly in the same direction. I'll count 1, 2, 3. And they all fly up, and the net gets caught in a tree, and they all fly away. And the hunter's really annoyed, like, what am I going to do? So the next day, he throws the net over the birds again. Exact same thing happens. Then the third day, well, some of the birds are getting bored conforming and doing what all the other birds are doing. So one say, let's go to the right. No, let's go to the left. No, let's go straight on. No, let's go backwards. And all the birds are going in all these different directions. And guess what happens? They get caught. And I think that's a great metaphor. We have this tradition in Unitarian Universalism of being individuals. And we've got this kind of radical individualism that we all come here with a certain freedom, but we also come here in the sense to be in community. And there's trade-offs we mean to be in community, that we want to be together. Like you're sitting here not heckling me right now. Well, at least maybe it's internal, I don't know. But the fact is we have certain agreements that we make, like we were going to conform so that we can be together as one community. And I think that story of the bird's good, because with birds, they can overcome being caught, they can overcome being oppressed, they can fly along the beach and turn in unison when they're coordinated as one. But then if everyone wants to go in this different direction, then chaos can assume. So be thinking about how do you want to conform to be in community, and when do you want to be an individual? I think that's one of the great challenges we have within Unitarian Universalism and within our culture.
I grew up culturally Jewish. My mother's parents were Orthodox Jews. They kept kosher, observed the Sabbath, and attended synagogue regularly. I remember the 2 sets of dishes they had in their kitchen, milchadich and fleischadich, one set for dairy and one set for meat. Their brand of orthodoxy did not include a religious education for women. So my mother never learned Hebrew, nor did she have a bat mitzvah. In turn, neither did I. Not knowing Hebrew has always made me feel separate from the Jewish religion. When I would attend services, I couldn't follow along because I couldn't read the Hebrew words on the page. When Rob and I moved to Redwood City, we were looking for a way to feel part of a community. Rob is not Jewish, and his experience attending Jewish services was also isolating. We came to UUFRC looking for connection, each bringing our own religious identity and hoping for a place that would honor our past and connect us with the present. I had some trepidation about being a Jew in a church. Even the word church is hard for me to say. I wondered if I could bring my full self here and be accepted. I still identify as Jewish, and I have some fear of Christianity itself in that I connected in my mind with anti-Semitism. I grew up with a lot of conversation about the Holocaust, and while my grandparents are not survivors, they lived through it from afar. And if I had been born in a different time and place, I could have been someone in hiding or in the camps. And that fear still hasn't left me today. Okay, I know I've gotten a little dark here. But this is my positionality, the individuality that I bring with me every time I walk in this building. Every time I stand up here to share my stories with you, it isn't something I regularly talk about, and it isn't a constant worry or fear, but it does live with me, and it is part of who I am. I have been relieved and heartened to find that not only am I accepted here, I can also contribute to this community. I believe that my individuality helps make UUFRC a little richer, a little more diverse. I know there are some UU Jews in this congregation that feel the way I feel. And there are some of you from different backgrounds that are eager to learn more. When I've brought up concerns about feeling othered or being left out, that feedback has been taken and changes were made. Each of us brings a perspective, an identity that may not be shared, but nonetheless exists. For me, UUFRC is a place I have found support, friendship, and an outlet for my creativity. I love the welcoming spirit I have found, the kindness when I have struggled, and the fun we have. Each of us brings something different to this fellowship, and together, we are so much more than the sum of our parts.
That's quite an existential question. Why am I me? Maybe we should just all sit with that for a minute. Well, being me, I get confused with certain words. And I want to go back almost 3.5 years ago when I saw the congregational packet for this congregation. And there was, this was a history of the congregation that that was put out to ministers to see were they interested in the congregation. And they share some really difficult parts of the history of the congregation. That wasn't the part that kind of puzzled me most. One of the parts that puzzled me was the mission statement, which is kind of important. And I'm going to read it to you. It's in the back of the order of service. But it says, "We are a welcoming, inclusive community of individuals of all ages who seek spiritual meaning, empower personal growth, build connections with our neighbours, act for justice, and inspire others to join us." Well, that sounds pretty good, except that community of individuals. Not that it's in there, but why did it need to be put in there? That really puzzled me, a community of individuals. What else is a community? But it was obviously mission statements. You spend a lot of time. Some of you were involved with that, and I'm sure there's a backstory. I've asked about the backstory, and I've heard 5 or 6 so far. But that idea of a community of individuals, and I think it actually speaks to a challenge we have in Unitarian Universalism, and partly in North America in general, this kind of radical individualism that we have. And I want to explore a little bit about that in today's service. To begin with, I want to ask another question. In the course of history, has religion been a positive thing or a negative thing? In a true Unitarian Universalist answer, I would say both. And it depends. You have to look back at the history of religion And it really started when human beings stopped being so nomadic, and they started forming cities. And that's where most organized religion kind of grew up, was in cities, not with nomadic people. And it's one of the biggest claims for the origin of history was once you started to get cities above, or groups of people above 150 people, you didn't know everyone. So how did you trust people you didn't know? How did you trust strangers? And part of that was religion. If you were the same religion, you were more likely to trust people. And if you look at the history of religion, and we're talking back like 4,000 years, 5,000 years ago, that was one of the formations of organized religion, was in cities, to prove that people could trust strangers. But ultimately, human beings are groupish. And we define our identity usually against another group. We are often defined as an in-group and an out-group, and that's how the identity's established. And religion has often reinforced that groupishness, both in a positive and negative way. And if you look at the origin of the word religion, it means to bind together. That was the idea of religion. If you look at the original Latin, it actually is to bind together as the purpose of religion. So community is at the very heart of religion. But then so much of throughout history has been this reaction of individuals against oppressive religion. This because religion has forced conformity on people. You have to believe a certain way, you have to behave a certain way. And the natural human instinct for many of us is to resist that. So there's always been this tension between religion bringing people together through conformity and people wanting that freedom to be me, as we just heard in the song. And our transcendentalist side of our religion, the 19th century literary and religious movement within the Unitarian side of our tradition, they were very influenced by Eastern religion. And so they thought the true religious experience could be going in and looking at your inner self. And that's where you could connect with that true spirit, that divine spark within each of us, that eternal flame that connects us. And not that was intended, but where that ended up taking us, that basically reinforced that radical individualism that was already part of North American culture. So the transcendentalists and North American culture blended to create this radical individualism, which I think still impacts our movement to this day. And many Unitarian Universalists, almost 90% of us, come to Unitarian Universalism after rejecting another religion. And I do wonder, having rejected one religion, if it kind of softens our commitment to our religion. And there's a joke about the Unitarian Universalists that get stranded in a desert island. And the people arrive after a few years to rescue him. And they see he's got 3 houses. And they ask you, what are the 3 houses? He goes, well, the first one's my home. What's the second one? He said, oh, that's my place of worship. Okay, what's the third one? He said, that's the church I used to go to. Does ring true, doesn't it? But there's also that freedom that we have, that freedom to be individuals does bring a strength to our religion, because if you're just dealing with conformity, that restricts questioning, that restricts people being their authentic self, that restricts that co-creative spirit. And so we do want people to bring their individuality to us, but we don't want to get stuck in that radical individualism. And I want to give you an example of the difference between individualism and individuality. Most of us know what the golden rule is. It's common in many of the world religions. Do have to unto others as you'd like to have done to you. The golden rule is in Christian, it's in Muslim, it's in Jewish tradition, it's in many religious traditions. That's individualistic. There's a better thing than the golden rule, the platinum rule. There's always something better. And the platinum rule is, do have unto others as they would like have done unto them. Do unto others as they would like to have done unto them. And the reason I think that is more individuality is because it asks for relationship. It's not like, I'm an individual, I know what's best for Amy, I know what's best for Liz. I don't know what's best for them. I'm not even sure I know what's best for myself. But what individuality, that idea of the platinum rule, asks you to go and find out, how do others want to be treated? How do others want to be identified? How do they want to experience this religious community? That's where the individuality comes in. Individualism thinks when I know best for others. And the British author Jeremy Lent says, our values arise from our identity. If someone defines themselves as an isolated individual, they will feel entitled to pursue their own happiness at the expense of others. Someone who identifies primarily with the nation will have no qualms about putting barriers up to prevent others from entering. And if you identify primarily with all life, you're likely to devote your existence to work for the benefit of all sentient beings. Our mainstream culture, forged in medieval Europe and rationalized by reductionist science from the 17th century onward, tells us to find our identity in separation. But that old worldview of separation has expired. It's not just dangerous, it's leading us to the precipice of ecological devastation and climate breakdown. It's plain wrong. That's the British author, Jeremy Lent. So that idea of separation that individualism leads to, I think, is the problem. And as Liz talked about in her reflection, she said she comes to religious community for connection, not for separation. And to have that connection, we all need to make certain sacrifices to be here. Maybe you didn't want to be here at 10:30. Maybe you don't want to come on a Sunday, but you make the effort because that's how we connect, that's how we build community, by making the effort to show up. We honored the board members who retired earlier. They gave a lot to this community, to serve this community in ways most of us are not even aware of. And people do that throughout this community. We are giving to something larger than ourselves. And that is the essence of spiritual growth, of serving others. And there's a story from the Jewish tradition of this old rabbi, and he's got students, and he asked them, how can you tell when day has begun and night has ended? And one of them says, is it when you can see a dog and a sheep in the distance and tell which one's which? And the rabbi says, no. Another person says, is it when I look at a tree in the distance and I can tell if it's a fig tree or a peach tree? The rabbi says, no. He was a man of few words. And the rabbi said, it's when you can look into a person's eyes and see them as a sibling. If you do not see a sibling in a stranger's eyes, it's still night. And I love that idea that we can look into someone's eyes and recognize that connection we have with them, that sibling that we have with them. Because individualism can so much narrow our social vision. And we see that in our society, that individualism, where we're seeing the horrendous treatment of the transgender community in Texas, Florida, and other states. We see the horrendous separation people see from immigrants, from people of color, from people with different religions, and those who are economically disadvantaged. Because community at its best stresses interdependence, not independence. And that's one of the new values that our Unitarian Universalism is trying to promote, the idea of interdependence rather than independence. And I think individualism leads to that independence, whereas community and community values lead to interdependence, that relational element, that platinum role of seeking to ask how people wish to be treated rather than assuming we know. We have to be careful not to elevate the society over the individual or the individual over society. We kind of need to unify those two approaches, understanding that each is the key to unlocking the power and value of community and creating harmony. Because ultimately, harmony is what we're looking for. I've often heard things of unity in diversity. I don't think that's correct. I think the richness of diversity is when we can do it in harmony, where we hear those different voices, we find those people with different identities, with different experiences, be it of different age, from different countries, from different genders, from different gender identity, sexual orientation. If we can bring those together in a community of diversity with harmony and not unity, I believe that is the goal of religious community. That's where we can bring our individuality but overcome the limits of individualism. As the old Jewish rabbi from the 2 millennia ago, Hillel said, "If I am not for myself, who will be for me? And when I am only for myself, what am I? If not now, then when?" If I am not for myself, who will be for me? And when I am only for myself, what am I? And if not now, then when? We have religious freedom within Unitarian Universalism, and I ask you, what is that freedom for? We often talk about being freedom from something, but what's that freedom for? And Unitarian Universalism asks us to stretch, to challenge us. What do we want that freedom for? I believe we want that freedom to bring more harmony into our world, into our community, and into our personal lives. And there's a tension. There's a tension between the attractiveness of freedom and the desire for community. And we can't ignore that. We need to live into that tension, that community of individuals. So perhaps that mission statement, being a community of individuals, is a good thing. It reminds us of that tension that we have, that we try and overcome. Healthy community requires each of us to make sacrifices and have a wider perspective than any one of our own personal interests. And for some of us, with great privilege, like myself, I may need to be uncomfortable to make others comfortable in our community, especially those with more marginalized identities. And perhaps the freedom in what it's for is so that we can embrace our own individuality to create more harmony within the diverse array of experiences and identity that make up the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Redwood City.